Nora Lane ran across the wet asphalt, clutching her jacket to her chest. The New York rain was sharp, punishing, as if reminding her she was late. In the windows of Amaro, the city lights shimmered, elegant, cold, untouchable. Inside, everything gleamed with crystal and steel, like a world she could only enter through humiliation. Lane, her manager's voice hit her like a slap the moment she stepped in. 15 minutes late. One more time like this, and don't bother coming back. He shoved a notepad into her hands and gestured toward the far corner of the room. Table 24. Consider it your punishment. Nora lifted her eyes and froze. By the window sat a man who didn't belong to this restaurant, this night, or maybe even this city. Marco Valieri. Too calm. Too still. He wasn't eating or drinking, just holding a glass of red wine like a trophy. People at nearby tables whispered, glancing at him from behind their menus. Rumor had it he invested in places where people later disappeared. That his name was something even his partners avoided saying aloud. Nora exhaled, forcing on her professional smile. She walked up to him with the steady grace of someone who'd learned to hide her fear. Good evening. Would you like anything else? He raised his eyes. Gray, unreadable, calm like the sea before a storm. Your accent, he said quietly. Italian. Where from? She hesitated. I grew up with my grandmother. She's from Salerno. Salerno, his lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. A beautiful place. But it doesn't forgive mistakes. His voice was soft, yet something in it chilled her blood. She wanted to step away, but his gaze held her, deliberate and unblinking. Your order, sir, she asked, trying to sound steady. Surprise me. He set down his glass, and the reflection of the wine shimmered in his eyes. But not with what you serve the others. Nora nodded, retreating, feeling the air thicken around him, as if gravity itself obeyed his presence. Even the bartender stopped joking as she passed. Just finish your shift and leave. Alive. But deep inside, she already knew this night wouldn't end when her shift did. Marco Valieri wasn't a man you met by accident. And if fate had chosen to cross their paths in this rain-soaked evening, it had its own dangerous plans. Her phone buzzed just as she was crossing the room with a tray in her hands. The sound was small, almost ordinary, but for Nora, it was the sound of her world cracking open. The screen flashed a name she hadn't seen in months, Zia Rosa. Her aunt never called without reason. She answered instinctively, and the shift in her voice was immediate, softer, faster, trembling. Italian poured from her lips, urgent and frightened, a language she hadn't used in months but that came rushing back like muscle memory. Every word seemed to make her breath shorter. Her eyes filled with tears before she even heard the full sentence. Something about the hospital, something about her grandmother. The tray in her hands tilted, a glass clinked against another, and for a moment she forgot she was in Amaro, forgot the glittering tables, the scent of truffle butter and wine. All she could see was a white hospital room, her grandmother's fragile hand, the machines. Then silence fell. The kind that cuts through conversation. Nora blinked and realized people were staring. And among them, one man. Marco Valieri. He sat perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on her with unnerving focus. He didn't look surprised. He looked interested. When she finally found the strength to lower the phone, he spoke, his tone soft, deliberate. You sound like someone who just came home. The words hit her like an aftershock. Her pulse jumped, her throat tightened. She wanted to look away, but his gaze held her, patient, almost tender, and yet there was something beneath it, something that made her skin prickle. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's family." "Family," he repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. "The only thing worth anything." Nora turned, half blind from the rush of tears she refused to let fall. The tray trembled in her hands as she carried it back to the bar. Her manager barked something sharp, but the words didn't reach her. All she could hear was her own heartbeat, wild, uneven, and the echo of that voice. Outside, the night air hit her like cold water. She called again, this time her aunt answered through sobs. Her grandmother was slipping away. The phone nearly fell from Nora's hands. Rain gathered in her hair, on her lashes, but she didn't move. Through the glass she could still see Amaro's golden light, and Marco Valieri, unmoving, still watching her. And in that moment she knew, with a clarity that felt like fear. This night had marked her. That phone call hadn't just called her home. It had chosen her. The rain had turned to a steady curtain by midnight, blurring the streetlights behind Amaro. Nora stood by the back door, her apron still on, the phone cold in her shaking hand. Her aunt's voice still echoed in her ears, the hospital, the failing heartbeat, the word come. She pressed the phone to her chest and tried to breathe. The city around her smelled of wet metal and gasoline, and the puddles shimmered with the same gold as the restaurant lights. She told herself she would quit. Tonight. Go to the hospital, be with her grandmother, disappear from this place. The metal door creaked open behind her. A shadow moved. Mississippi Lane. Her body stiffened before she even turned. Marco Valieri was standing there, the rain sliding off his dark coat as if it refused to touch him. A driver waited a few steps behind, holding an umbrella that Marco didn't bother to use. She stepped back instinctively. "Mr. Valieri, how did you?" "I left shortly after you did," he said calmly. "It wasn't hard to guess which door you'd choose." His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but it carried the kind of certainty that filled every empty space around it. "I heard your call," he added. "You spoke Italian." The sound of someone losing family is unmistakable. Her throat tightened. "What do you want?" He reached into his coat and handed her a white envelope, heavy and perfectly dry despite the rain. "A ticket," he said. "Naples. You're flying with me." For a moment she thought it was a cruel joke. She even laughed, a small, nervous sound that broke halfway. "You can't be serious." "I'm not in the habit of joking," he replied simply. He held out another envelope. "Inside is your passport and a small advance. You'll need both." Nora stared at the paper as if it might burn her fingers. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Marco said, taking a step closer. "You told the truth tonight. That's a rare currency in my world." The words didn't make sense, but the way he said them left no room for argument. "I can't just leave," she whispered. "My grandmother. She'll be transferred to Naples tomorrow morning," he interrupted softly. "Everything is arranged. The doctors, the care, all of it." She froze. "You, how?" "Because I can," he said, not unkindly. "And because I want you there." Something inside her wavered, not trust, not yet, but the dizzy feeling of standing too close to a ledge. "Why me?" He studied her face for a long moment before answering. "Because sometimes the truth finds us first. And when it does, we follow." Nora's mind spun, fear, disbelief, exhaustion all mixing into something wordless. The rain was falling harder now, cold needles against her skin. A car door opened. The driver waited. I'm not going anywhere with you, she tried one last time, but even to her own ears it sounded weak. Marco tilted his head, eyes narrowing just slightly. Then you'll make me waste time convincing you, he said quietly. And trust me, time is the only thing I don't enjoy wasting. Something in the tone, not threat, not anger, but finality, made her move. Minutes later she was in the back seat of a sleek black car, the city sliding by in streaks of gold and rain. She held the envelope in her lap like evidence of a crime she hadn't meant to commit. Marco sat beside her, silent, the faint scent of smoke and expensive cologne between them. His reflection in the window looked carved from shadow. After a long stretch of silence, he spoke. Fear isn't the enemy, Mississippi Lane. It keeps you alive. Just don't let it decide where you go. She turned to look at him, and realized he wasn't watching the road, but her. Outside, a runway glimmered through the darkness. Engines hummed somewhere ahead. And as the car slowed to a stop, Nora understood that the world she knew, the city, her shift, even her grief, had already begun to fade behind her. What waited ahead was something else entirely. Something that began with him. The rain drummed harder against the car roof as they crossed the empty runway. The world outside blurred into streaks of silver and black. By the time they reached the jet, Nora felt hollow, like her body had been replaced by air. Inside, the plane was quiet. Too quiet. No flight attendants, no announcements, just the low hum of engines warming up. Marco gestured for her to sit. She sank into the seat, clutching her bag, the scent of fuel and leather mixing until she felt dizzy. He sat across from her, perfectly composed, like a man in a boardroom rather than a midnight flight. When the cabin doors sealed, the silence grew heavier. The plane began to move. Nora's breath quickened. Every sound, the click of his lighter, the low vibration under her feet, felt magnified. He watched her without speaking. Finally, she blurted out. You don't even know me. You don't know what I've left behind. I know exactly what you've left behind, he said. I saw it on your face when you took that call. You were already gone before you answered. Something in his tone made her chest ache, not cruelty, but certainty. She wanted to shout, to demand who he thought he was, but her voice came out small. You think that gives you the right to decide my life? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I think sometimes people need someone to decide when they can't. Or when you want to own them, she whispered. His eyes lifted slowly, and for a heartbeat, she regretted saying it. But he didn't snap. He only smiled, faint, tired, almost human. You think this is about control? You give me too much credit. Then, quietly. When I was your age, someone pulled me out of a street in Naples. Said the same words you just did. I thought he owned me. He didn't. He just made sure I stayed alive long enough to understand the price of it. Nora stared at him. The confession was so unexpected that for a moment she forgot her fear. What was the price? She asked. He exhaled smoke through his nose, gaze unfocused. My name. The plane climbed higher, lights of New York falling away like dying embers. The turbulence hit, soft at first, then rough enough to make her gasp. Marco reached across the aisle and pressed her hand down on the armrest, steady but not forceful. Breathe, he said. I'm not scared of flying, she muttered, though her pulse betrayed her. I know, he said simply. That's not what you're afraid of. Their eyes met, hers full of questions, his full of things he would never answer. When the plane leveled out, he withdrew his hand, reached for his phone, and said something short and sharp in Italian. Nora couldn't catch the words, but his tone made her skin crawl. He ended the call and looked out the window. "Everything changes when we land," he said quietly. She turned to the glass, only darkness and stars reflected back at her. For the first time, she wondered if anyone even knew she was gone. And as the plane cut through the clouds, she felt it, that sick, electric certainty that whatever waited in Naples had already begun long before she boarded this flight. Dawn spread slowly across the horizon as the jet dipped toward the Italian coast. The sea below was blinding with light, silver blue and endless. Nora pressed her forehead to the glass, the beauty of it hurt. Somewhere, her grandmother was breathing through machines. Somewhere, a hospital waited. But she was here, following a man she barely knew into a life she didn't understand. Marco hadn't spoken since the plane touched down. He walked ahead, the kind of presence that drew silence from everyone around him. No one stopped them, no one checked her passport. A black car waited on the runway, doors open, engine running. The road wound through the cliffs of Amalfi, sea on one side, stone on the other. The air smelled of salt and lemons. "How much do you control?" she asked suddenly. "Enough to keep the people I care about alive." "Am I one of them?" He glanced at her. "Live here a week. Then decide who protects whom." The villa appeared like a mirage, white stone, glass, terraces hanging above the sea. Guards stood by the gates, not many, but alert. Even the driver avoided looking directly at Marco. Inside, the air was cool, perfumed with lemon and candle wax. "This is your room," said a woman in a dark uniform. Her English was careful, rehearsed. The room opened to the cliffs. The sea stretched beyond the glass like another sky. On the nightstand lay a silver cross. "Who left that?" Nora asked. "The signore," the woman replied and left without another word. Nora touched the cross, cold, solid, unfamiliar. Was it a gift? A warning? She couldn't tell. By noon, 2 doctors arrived. They spoke quietly with Marco, their tone deferential. When they turned to her, one said, "Your grandmother is being transferred to Naples. Preparations are underway. She's stable for now." The words hit her harder than she expected. Being transferred. Even her family now moved at his command. That evening, Marco took her to the hospital. Her grandmother was there, pale but breathing, her hand warm in Nora's. Relief crashed through her, sharp and guilty. She turned and saw Marco in the doorway, watching but not intruding. "Why are you doing this?" she asked when they stepped outside. He took a moment to answer. The sea wind tugged at his jacket, softening the sharpness of him. "I owed someone a debt once," he said. "You reminded me of her voice." It wasn't a confession, it was a fracture. For the first time, his calm seemed like armor. Days passed. The villa was both sanctuary and cage. Guards patrolled quietly, servants whispered and vanished at the sound of his footsteps. Each night they dined together, crystal, candlelight, the sea's endless breathing beyond the windows. He spoke little, but his silences were heavy. She began to feel the pull of him, not trust, not affection, but a strange gravity. It frightened her how easily fear could turn into curiosity. One night, a storm rolled in. The lights flickered, the sound of thunder shook the windows. She found him in the library, speaking low and fast in Italian. When he saw her, he ended the call. "Bad news?" she asked. He poured a drink, ice cold. A reminder that peace never lasts. Then, quieter, "Tomorrow there's a dinner. Business. You'll come." Her pulse jumped. I'm not part of your world. He moved closer, not touching her, but near enough for her to feel the heat of him. Everything that stands beside me becomes part of it, he said. For a heartbeat, the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. I don't want this, she whispered. Neither did I, he replied. And yet here we are. Lightning flashed, white across his face, revealing a flicker of something raw beneath the composure. Not cruelty. Pain. Go to bed, Nora, he said softly. Tomorrow you'll see what my world costs. Later that night, she woke to the echo of thunder and the sound of waves. Through the glass doors she saw him standing on the terrace, the wind pulling at his shirt, a cigarette burning low in his hand. He pressed a palm briefly to his chest, as if something inside hurt, then turned back toward the sea. And in that fragile, fleeting moment, she realized. For all his power, he looked utterly alone. The night broke open with thunder. The villa no longer felt safe, it pulsed with footsteps, murmured orders, and the faint hum of engines waiting below. From her window, Nora watched headlights winding up the coastal road. Every flash of lightning carved the world in silver and black. Her dress lay across the bed, black silk, modest, perfect, not hers. When she put it on, the fabric felt cold, like the air before a storm. She didn't recognize the woman in the mirror, someone quieter, sharper, afraid to breathe too loudly. Marco appeared at her door, coat slung carelessly over one shoulder. You're ready, he said. It wasn't a question. They drove down the coastal road, rain streaking across the windshield like threads of glass. The silence between them was thick. She didn't ask where they were going, not anymore. Questions had their own price here. The second villa was older, fortress-like, with guards standing beneath stone arches. Marco leaned toward her before they stepped out. Whatever happens, don't look afraid, he said softly. They notice fear the way sharks notice blood. Inside, chandeliers burned with soft light over a table long enough to seat a small army. A dozen men rose when Marco entered, respect, but not warmth. At the head waited Don Pietro de Luca, his smile refined, practiced. Valieri, he said, extending both hands. It's been too long. And who's this? Nora Lane, Marco replied evenly. A guest. Ah, the Don said, his gaze settling on her. An audience. How charming. The meal began with wine and meaningless politeness. Beneath it, business pulsed, contracts, ports, shipments. Every word was part of a map she didn't understand. She kept her eyes on her plate, her heart beating too fast. Halfway through the meal, a document was passed to Marco. It slid across the table like a blade. He flipped through it, expression unreadable. Then, just for a moment, the page turned toward her. And she saw it, a date that shouldn't be there. Tomorrow, not next week. Too early. Her breath caught. She didn't think, she just leaned closer. The date, she whispered. It's wrong. He didn't react at first. Then his pen stilled. You're sure? Yes. He nodded once, then turned to the Don with a polite smile. You might want to have your assistant check the schedule, he said smoothly. This version seems rushed. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Don Pietro's eyes hardened. Are you suggesting I don't know my own business? Marco's tone stayed light. I'm suggesting someone in your house does. The words dropped like stones into deep water. Chairs creaked, one man's hand brushed his jacket, too close to a weapon. Then the Don's fingers lifted, subtle, commanding stillness. Enjoy your meal, Marco. But remember whose table this is. And whose pen just saved you €1,000,000, Marco answered, still smiling. They stood. The air shifted, dangerous, unsaid. Marco's hand closed around Nora's arm, firm, not rough. Time to go, he murmured. Outside, rain slashed the marble steps. He didn't speak until they were in the car, doors sealed, engine humming. Then his composure cracked. Don't ever do that again. His voice was low, controlled, and shaking at the edges. I saw the wrong date. You saw death, and you talked to it. Her hands trembled. The fear hit late, the kind that comes only when you're already safe. Her stomach twisted, she felt sick, breathless. You should have told me, she whispered. You should have warned me. I don't warn people who aren't supposed to be there. The headlights ahead blurred in the rain. In the mirror, a pair of lights followed, too steady, too close. Marco's eyes flicked up. He spoke briefly in Italian, cold and fast. Change the route, he told the driver. Lose them. The car turned sharply down a narrower road along the cliffs. Nora's heart hammered as the sea flashed below in the dark. After a long silence, Marco exhaled. You think I don't know fear, he said quietly. You think I enjoy this? She turned toward him. You hide it well. I learned early, he said. Fear keeps you alive. Guilt buries you. The following car disappeared behind the bend. They drove the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the villa, extra guards were waiting at the gates. Marco didn't glance at them. He went straight inside, poured whiskey, and downed it in one breath. Nora stood near the doorway, unsure whether to speak. Her body still trembled, her throat burned. Finally, she said, you could have died tonight. He set the glass down. We all could. That's business. This isn't business. This is war. He looked at her then, something flickering behind the calm. You're learning fast. She stepped closer, anger replacing fear. You used me. I was just collateral, he interrupted, almost smiling. No. You're a complication I didn't plan for. The words landed heavy, but his voice had softened. He turned toward the window, watching the storm fade into the horizon. You changed the room tonight, he said after a pause. They'll remember that. Is that good or bad? Both, he said simply. Lightning flashed, painting his face in pale light. She saw exhaustion there, and loneliness so sharp it looked like a wound. He looked over his shoulder. You stopped being a guest the moment you opened your mouth, he said quietly. Now, if they come for me, they'll come for you too. Nora felt it then, the final, irrevocable click of fate. The point where fear and choice became the same thing. Outside, the waves struck the cliffs in slow, endless rhythm. Inside, the silence between them deepened until it was almost tender. And somewhere in that silence, she realized, she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him. But of what she was becoming beside him. Morning came softly, as if the sea had decided to give them mercy. The air smelled of salt and lemon, light slid down the walls and touched her skin like water. Nora woke late, her body still remembered fear, but beneath it was something else, quiet and dangerous. On the nightstand lay an envelope, familiar handwriting, graceful curves. A letter from her grandmother. Love isn't about trust, it read. Love is what keeps coming back, even when it shouldn't. At the bottom, a single line, take care of him while he still remembers how to look at the sea. Her hands trembled as she reread it. She didn't know how her grandmother could have known about him. About Marco. About all of this. When she stepped into the garden, he was already there, barefoot, holding a cup of coffee, staring at the horizon as if it whispered secrets. "You don't sleep?" she asked. "I rarely do," he said quietly. "Dreams don't forgive what I've done." She walked closer, the wind catching the hem of her robe. "Sometimes I think you don't even know who you are." He smiled faintly. "You think I'm pretending?" "I think with me, you're not." Marco looked at her, slowly, intently, with that dangerous softness that made breathing harder. He stepped closer. One breath apart. "Nora," he murmured. "Don't talk," she said. "Just stay." He touched her hand, carefully, as if afraid she might vanish. Everything else faded, the sea, the distant guards, the cry of gulls. Only their breathing remained, and his palm against her neck. The kiss was quiet, but it carried everything unsaid: guilt, fear, desire, something that almost felt like redemption. When they parted, he whispered, "I can't promise you safety." "I'm not asking for that," she said. "Just don't be the first to let go." He gave a small, sad smile. "You don't know what you're asking." "Yes, I do," Nora said. "I'm asking for the truth." The seaside below, as if agreeing. And he still held her hand, too tightly for it to mean nothing. And in that moment, Nora knew. No matter what storm waited ahead, their story had already begun with love. Tell us which state you're from and which part you liked the most. Subscribing is the best way to say thanks.